Let's go ahead and talk about a single cycle processor. So we've got a single cycle processor and it has three types of instructions. They take different amounts of time to execute, and here's the percentage of each program that is made up of those instructions. And so the question is, what's the fastest clock speed we can use for this single cycle processor? Well, to answer this, the first thing we need to know is what determines the fastest clock. Well, to choose the fastest clock in a processor, we need to look at the slowest logic path. So in this case of these three instructions, the slowest one is type 1, which takes 800 picoseconds. So we need to make sure the clock is slow enough that we can take that logic path and do it correctly. The other ones will go much faster, but that's okay. Processor will end up wasting time for them. But this one has to be, the clock has to be slow enough to handle this one. So the answer is 800 picoseconds. So let's take a look at the efficiency of a single cycle processor. So we have a processor here that has three different types of instructions, and each of those instructions takes a different amount of time to do its logic, and we can see that in programs, the program made up of different percentages of those instructions. And so the question is, if we execute 10 instructions from a program, what percentage of the processor's clock cycle time is going to be wasted? Well, to look at this, we can start here. So type 1 is the slowest instruction. That means the clock cycle is going to have to be set by this. So we'll have an 800 picosecond clock cycle, and 30% of the instructions are type 1. That means that 30% of the time we're not going to waste anything because we'll use the full clock cycle. So the largest amount of waste we could possibly have would be 70%, so we can say it's not 80%. Now let's take a look at the second type here. So for 20% of the time, we only use 200 picoseconds of the full 800. So that means we waste 600 of the 800 picoseconds. So we're definitely wasting something, so we know it's not going to be 0%. And if we look at the third type of instruction, we can see half the time, because these are 50% of the instructions, we only use 250 of the 800 picoseconds. That is, we waste 550. Now from this we can do the calculation. So how long does it take to execute 10 instructions? Well, 30% of them are going to be type 1, 20% type 2, and 50% type 3, but they're all going to run 800 picoseconds because they all have the same clock speed. Now, how much time do we waste? Well, for the type 1 instructions, we don't waste anything because our clock time is 800 picoseconds, and these are also 800 picoseconds. But for type 2, we're going to waste 600 picoseconds because we only need 200 of the 800 picoseconds to do it. So we can calculate how much time we're wasting of that, and then we can calculate the percentage we waste, which is just a fraction of these, or about 50%. So for this example, it's going to be 50%.